Tashi Duncan. Let's talk about it. So in my previous video, I did have some opinions about the relationship between Art and Patrick. And a lot of you guys certainly loved my last video, but like I said previously, I wanted to focus on Tashi because she deserved her own breakdown. In my last video, I called Tashi the tennis ball between both of the tennis rackets held by Art and Patrick. That is to say that Tashi is the ball that keeps them rolling. Tennis is nothing without the ball. Without the ball, you have no game. And Tashi, being that catalyst, like I mentioned previously, is what keeps all three of them going. Tashi is a brilliant manipulator. From her very first few lines and her presence, you see so much about her, and there's so much we can learn from her and so much we can take away from her as a character, and I wanted to talk about it. But if you don't know who I am, hi, my name is Deborah, student, singer, songwriter, and everything else in between. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about my favorite TV shows and movies. And today, we're talking about Tashi Duncan. So let's get into it. The first thing you notice about Tashi when she enters the screen is power. Tashi is powerful. Tashi as a character is very interesting, but I do feel that Zendaya's performance really gives her a lot of screen presence, making her extremely alluring. I've always thought about that scene when she is in her iconic blue dress with Art and Patrick at the beach, with her long hair making her look like some sort of siren, luring sailors to their deaths. A pure representation of what's about to happen in their relationship. At first glance, I took Tashi as somebody who didn't really, or perhaps wasn't really, a caring person to me. In my personal opinion, you can't really be a caring person and make some of the decisions that she has made. But taking a second look at this movie, she's actually much of a deeper character than I thought she was. Let's give her a little bit of background and context. It's interesting because Tashi herself says that she grew up in a family that was not really able to afford much of the lifestyle that she has now. Unlike the rest of her peers, Tashi was not born and bred for the high upper class or the high echelon that belonged to the country club life. She had to work hard. Going to Stanford would actually be a very logical choice for her. Not only would she secure herself an education that would cost so much money, but also she would be a star tennis player alongside that. This is also highlighted by the fact that she is so popular that she also has multiple sponsorships. It hints that her income could possibly be one of the sole income for the rest of her family, and it makes sure that her and her family are able to live a good life and afford her education. I think this part gets really overlooked because Tashi is easily and can be easily made into a villain, but that's not the goal of this video. The goal is to understand Tashi from her background all the way to now. Looking back at her childhood, it would make sense why she is constantly as competitive as she is. Not only is she in love with tennis, which I will get to that a little bit later, but also she recognizes that she does have to work hard. She does have to continue in the game. And unlike Patrick, who can easily coast and not get a further education, she can't simply do that. She has to think of her future, which is something that I think gets easily very much overlooked, which leads us to the present. See, Tashi is a very skilled manipulator. So let's start with her dynamic with the boys at first glance. See, the boys are interested in Tashi, first of all, because she's powerful, she's beautiful, hot, sexy, all of those things and above. And when she realizes that she has a certain push or power over them, she uses it to her advantage. I admire the fact that in this film, she doesn't allow them to walk all over her. Instead, she took her time and was able to play them like a fiddle. Was it a necessarily moral choice? No, but it is refreshing to see that from a bunch of other films that we've been seeing where women tend to be more manipulated by men in these situations, so I do think that's very, very refreshing. What made me realize that Tashi was way smarter than we thought she was is in her first encounter with Art and Patrick at the beach, she asked them what their future prospects was. This is a scene that's easy to glance over, but you see that Tashi's also thinking about her future and how her career and her future aligns with any of these guys. She asks about them going to college, and it is Art that says that he's eventually going to go to Stanford, whereas Patrick doesn't really believe in going into college and believes that he could go pro without going to university. I think it is such a moment that plants a seed, making Art a better long-term candidate and Patrick a better short-term candidate. As in, Art could definitely be somebody that she could eventually, as we do see in the film, get married to, because he does plan to have some sort of stability, whereas Patrick clearly shows that that's not in his agenda. Now, of course, this is an assumption off of one scene, but I do think it definitely plants the seed in Tashi's mind, which is why when Art eventually becomes the person that she marries, it's such an easy transition. If Art wasn't going to Stanford and didn't have more of a stable outlook, I don't think Tashi would have been as interested or as willing to marry him eventually down the line. Art is very much the representation of ice, like I said in my previous video, but he also is the more stable one out of the boys. However, while Art definitely provides more stability, I always thought that she was more physically attracted to Patrick than she was to Art, and that is because they are simply alike. They both have domineering personalities. I said in my previous video that the word alpha has been overused to death, but it is quite true in this situation. They both have alpha-like personalities. They see one another, they see each other's plans, and it foils because they can see right through one another. They are so alike that they tend to butt heads all the time, and they clash constantly, which is what I think is part of the appeal. She cannot walk all over Patrick, and he can't do the same with her either. Like recognizes like. Whereas with Art, her relationship takes more of a motherly note. It's clear that Art is willing to do anything for her, but with someone with Tashi's personality that is more domineering, that's not what she truly craves or wants. She tends to take this role as not only his wife, but also his mother, his coach, his guard, and practically someone who rules over him. And you see this take away from her spotlight, from her shine. Now, this definitely comes hand in hand with her injury, which I'll get to in a second, but even in the first few scenes in the film, it becomes painfully clear that Tashi does not truly love Art, and she doesn't truly love Patrick either, which leads me to my next point. Her injury. It is with her injury, Tashi takes on this image from master manipulator and woman who's able to play with two boys like a fiddle and yet still remain detached. It takes her from that into someone who is more vulnerable because she realizes that she will not be able to play any longer. She now has to be dependent on them. You see, the previous dynamic before was that she could be independent. She could leave at any time. She was the Tashi Duncan and she could outplay them at any point and anywhere. But now that she can't play tennis, the biggest love in her life, she has no choice but to stay with these two boys because those are the closest things that she could possibly have to being a tennis player. You see, Tashi was always ahead of the boys, but after her injury, it kind of put them on the same playing field. She was completely unreachable before, but after the injury, well, she kind of became like everybody else. This is not to take away from her character or disparage her, but it does show that at a certain point they put her on this pedestal, and the minute she became injured, well, even though they still admired her, the truth is that she didn't really have that advantage anymore. And as with this injury, we see how, despite all of her manipulation, she herself becomes more vulnerable, showing you that she is not completely infallible as a character, which is why I hesitate to even call her a villain. After this injury, you really see her turn from master manipulator into someone who still manipulates and is also codependent in this weird sort of bond between all three characters. You even have signs of her being more susceptible to both of the boys, even pre her injury, after having a conversation with Art in the cafeteria, where Art is able to simply plant a seed, insinuating that Patrick might have been cheating on her while he was on tour, or probably doing something else with somebody. Tashi, even though she clocks it and calls him a bad friend, at the end of the day, Art's plan did technically sort of work. It planted a seed of chaos, whether they really believed what he said or not. In my personal opinion, if someone was meant to be an outright villain, there wouldn't have been such a big of a fuss or fight. It would have been easy for her to discern that Art was trying to use his manipulative charms, and she wouldn't have let it get to her. But eventually she did, because she is human and she's just as much of the problem as the other two boys are. This is not me trying to defend Tashi or say that she's a good person. In fact, I think half of the decisions she's made in her life don't make her a good person. But I do think that these three characters are codependent on one another and are their own undoing. Which leads me to my third point. Tashi's true love is tennis. It becomes very apparent, at least from my interpretation, that Tashi, from what I see, is never truly in love with these two men. As I said it previously, she is attracted to Patrick, and Art provides her stability, but her true love is tennis. At many times where she should, or the average person would, show a lot of emotional intimacy, perhaps in her marriage with Art, or even in her conversations with Patrick when they were fighting, her first move was to talk about tennis, or meditate for the next tennis game, or give him tips. In fact, at many different points in the film for both the boys, her way of sort of giving any sort of constructive criticism is always talking about their game, how it can be improved, how it could have been done better. Even when she talks to Patrick and Art for the first time, she notices how they feel about the game. She says that Patrick himself isn't really a tennis player. He's just here because he doesn't really know what he wants to do. She sees that none of them really truly have that passionate love for the game. It is as if tennis is her true lover, her true soulmate, and these two boys were just the options that were available after her lover was no longer available after her injury. One of the other reasons I think that their marriage is so sour is because she has a love-hate relationship with Art. She hates the fact that she has to deal with him and constantly be his motivator, his coach, and that he's not taking it as seriously, but she knows at the same time that she won't be able to do the same. She sees his potential constantly, but because his heart is not in it, she feels like he's wasting it. He's wasting the potential that could have been. He's wasting the potential that could have been hers. She knows that she could do better. She knows that if it was up to her, she would have played a better game, but she can't physically do anything about it anymore. So she lives vicariously through him. And when she finally decides to give up on her relationship, what does she leverage? A divorce for a good game. Who in their natural right mind does that? No one. Unless you love tennis so much that you're willing to sacrifice your own marriage and, mind you, child for it. I truly believe that in this situation, besides her trying to manipulate the games so that Art could win, I think it was so easy for her to fall back into the arms of Patrick, not only because she's sexually attracted to him, but she knows that she could also have that proximity to tennis with him. She knew that Art was definitely giving up on tennis and he didn't really have the passion for it anymore. And she knew that Patrick was desperate to be popular again. And that is something that perhaps she also wanted. Now, this is in fact speculation, but it is very much a possibility as to why it became so easy for her, aside from their previous history. At the end of the day, Tashi, in my personal opinion, is an extremely flawed character. While being smart, cunning, and sly, she's also not a good person. Like I said, I'm not going to call her an outright villain because all three of them are at fault, but she's definitely not a caring person. And as much as I'm a feminist and I love supporting women's decisions, a lot of her decisions I cannot truly support. A true caring person would never force you to continue tennis matches, to live vicariously through you, and threaten to divorce you if you didn't do well enough. But I won't put all the blame on her either, because Art knew what he was getting into when he married her. He knew that she was more selfish. He knew that she was more detached. He knew that he was manipulating his way into their relationship. He knew that he was marrying a woman who very much put herself before him and her love for tennis before him. He knew that he wasn't necessarily marrying his equal or someone that would also consider his feelings first. And so there's definitely some accountability that needs to be taken on Art's part for that whole relationship. One thing that definitely shows Tashi's character and how she evolves throughout the whole entire film is through her costumes, actually, which is a small detail that I haven't really seen people point out. I don't know if it's just me and perhaps I'm going off an assumption, but it's interesting how a lot of her outfits before and pre her injury were bold and in bold colors. A lot of the time she either wears jumpers that are colored such as red or that iconic blue dress. In fact, besides her tennis outfits, while she is in her younger years, she wears a lot of bold colors. After her injury, her colors fade into that more of something in a background. Just like how she transitions from being such an important star that's so bold into somebody else's wife. Tashi's outfits go from bright colors to muted colors. She goes from wearing a lot of tennis outfits and sport-like outfits to more silk robes, which firstly could signify a class change or a change in status. But either way, she wears a lot of light colors or muted greens. And I think through this fashion, it sort of gives commentary on how her character has become bold, proud, very much in front of the scenes and very much shining, but towards the end, she loses herself, even towards the final scene where she's wearing a very muted blue, in big contrast to the very bright blue when she first met the two boys at the party in the beginning of the film. But I don't know, that's just me. Anyways, all in all, I think Tashi Duncan has been one of the most interesting characters I've seen in a while because she is so complex. I don't hate her at all in the slightest, but I don't particularly love anything that she specifically does. But she's human, and that's what makes her so compelling. But I'm curious to know what you guys feel down in the comments below. Let me know how you guys are feeling about Tashi and your opinions about her. And thank you guys so much for all the lovely reception on my previous video. I really appreciate it. And I will see you guys in the next video. Okay, bye.